Information design is one of those things where it's there, but you can't really see it. It sort of lives in between everything else, tying everything together. When information design is good, we typically don't notice it. But when it's bad, it's really, really, really obvious. For instance, when a form is difficult to complete, that usually results in errors on the part of the person completing the form. And because of that, it's usually costly to process on the business end. Poor information design in terms of instruction causes frustration and even danger that could possibly damage the reputation of the provider. In education, it results in materials that don't promote learning. Bad information design results in scientific and technical data that's open to misinterpretation, misreading. It's misunderstood. It's also present in command and control displays in manufacturing, where an operator isn't alerted to something that's potentially dangerous. And of course, it also is present in websites that are difficult to navigate and unpleasant to look at. Instances where we're confronted with a lot of information, but none of it seems very relevant. None of it seems to speak to the purpose or the reason that we came there in the first place. When information design fails, there's a very obvious consequence. Okay, so think of information design like the glue that holds all the other elements together. While it's easy to focus on the interface or the navigation, it's really the information that holds everything together. Okay, I'll give you a great analogy. I grew up doing carpentry because my father was a carpenter. And one of the first things that he taught me is that, contrary to popular belief, nails don't hold anything together. Glue holds things together. When you put two pieces of wood together, you put glue in between the joints. The only purpose the nail serves is to hold the wood together until the glue dries. The glue is what keeps that joint from shaking and wiggling later on in life. The glue is what makes it strong and solid as a rock. So in the same way, good information design is what makes good user experience work. Its primary purpose is to present information so that people can understand things easily and simply and quickly. And while information design is visual, that does not mean that we're focused on the finished look and feel. Instead, what we're concerned about is the effectiveness of the form itself. Does it communicate? Is it understandable? Is it appropriate? Think of it as sense making. When you look at something, when you absorb something, when you interact with something, you can either make sense of what's happening or you can't. And if you can't, that makes the thing hard to use, unpleasant to use, and frustrating. And chances are you'll stop doing it and do something else. It also speaks to our basic need for a certain level of control, okay? Because when we have control over our surroundings, when we can make sense of our environment, right? When we understand what's going on around us, when we understand how to affect it, how to interact with it, how to change it, how to manipulate it, we feel comfortable. And when we feel comfortable, we're more likely to continue on whatever path we may be on. And in the case of something that's put out there for human consumption, the creator of whatever it is that we're interacting with obviously has a vested interest in us continuing to use that product. So good information design in that way supports the goals of both the user, okay, the people that are interacting with it, and the creator, the person that created it in the first place. Good information design starts with appropriate organization. In other words, context. I'm very fond of saying to anyone who will listen, context is everything. All of the things that we look at, interact with, touch, taste, see, feel, whatever, are only valuable to us in the context of what we're doing when we're interacting with it. And context involves a lot of things, okay? It involves habit, it involves memory, and it demands a high degree of relevance. If what we're doing doesn't support the task we're trying to achieve or the end goal, it's not contextual. It doesn't match our state of being, our understanding of the world. It doesn't match the flow of work we're trying to accomplish. And because of that, it's not easily understood. So sometimes information design is a matter of grouping or arranging pieces of information. And that's something that we kind of take for granted because we're used to seeing common information grouped in very certain ways. And if that organization resonates with us in some way, it's because it reflects how we think, it matches what we expect, and it directly supports our tasks and goals. It's directly in line with what we're trying to achieve. It assists us in some way in getting from point A to B to C to D, etc. Now, as I said a minute ago, it's really easy to take this for granted, and that's because we're so conditioned to seeing things presented in a certain way that we almost don't even notice it. I'll give you a quick example. Take a look at this list of items. Does it seem confusing to you? It does, doesn't it? Why do you think that is? Well, the reason it seems confusing is because it usually looks like this. Much easier, isn't it? Right? This is because it's what we're used to seeing. The contextual arrangement of these elements is more in line with what our natural, ingrained, automatic, reflexive expectation is. Name and job title go together. Job title and company go together. Street address is always followed by city, state, and zip code, right? And phone number and email address, contact mechanisms, are almost always separated from everything else. Now, this is not something we consciously think of when we look at a form, but it's what enables us to zip through and complete stuff because the items, the fields, are in an order that matches our expectation. They're organized in a way that matches our context of use. There are 5 essential ways to organize information. Okay, I want to give you a brief overview of each one of those. The first is alphabetical. You use alphabetical organization when information is referential, when you're looking for sources in a dictionary or you're doing research using an encyclopedia. Okay, that's referential information. You also use alphabetical organization when you need efficient, nonlinear access to specific items. The contact list on your phone is a beautiful example of this. Most contact lists, not only on mobile phones, but on desktop software as well, the set defaults for how your contacts are displayed are usually either by first name or by last name, right? It's alphabetical. If you're looking for Joe Natoli and your contacts are organized, alphabetically, you're going to go right to N. Again, I'm saying things that are very painfully obvious, but this is unconscious habit, okay? You have to realize that. That alphabetical organization is the smartest way to do that because that's what we're conditioned to expect. You also use alphabetical organization when no other organizing strategy seems appropriate. Because one of the things that people will always default to is alphabetical organization. For instance, on a lot of auto parts sites, there are multiple ways that you can filter the information. You can get specific and say, well, it's this year, it's this make, it's this model. But a lot of times, if you go into a general parts category, everything is alphabetically organized because it's the simplest, most easily recognized form of organization. We go there automatically. So if you're struggling trying to figure out how to organize a certain information set, you can always default to alphabetical. It almost always makes sense. The second way to organize information is categorical. We take a categorical approach when there are clusters of similarity inside the information that we're dealing with. In a college catalog, in a statistical report, in instances where there's a common thread running through all the information. We also use it when people will naturally seek out information by category. Department stores are a perfect example of this. You walk into Target and you know that there are multiple departments. Men's clothing is over there, women's clothing is over there, kids' clothing, sporting goods, electronics, etc., right? We know where to go and we know what's contained within that category. E-commerce sites are exactly the same way. If you look at the example on your left, which comes from Home Depot, you'll see that they have core categories of information in their navigation, right? Winter essentials, emergency supplies, and then there are subcategories under each one of those areas. That helps us instantly identify what we might expect to find inside those categories. So categorical organization is something that's used a lot across the board, and it makes a lot of sense when you have a large volume of information to organize, because it's very difficult to comb through it all individually. So it's smarter to break it up into general categories that are going to make sense to people. The third way to organize information is by using a continuum, organization by magnitude, when you're showing something from lowest to highest, worst to best, smallest to largest, etc., etc. Things like search engine results are organized this way. Baseball statistics are organized this way. If you take a look at the image on the left, here's a chart that shows America's top 10 wealthiest people. And the continuum works both by size. You notice this guy in the bottom left is real small, and also by shape. You notice it sort of curves around to the left, it gets larger. So the guy up at the top, who's the king of the mountain here, is the largest, and he's also at the apex of the shape. So both visually and contextually, we have a very strong sense of how this works, right? Highest to lowest. We also use a continuum when we're comparing things that use a common measure, such as comparing processor speeds across different laptops or comparing hard drive space across portable hard drives. The common measure being the size of the drive, or the common measure being the speed of the processor. If we're buying an iPhone, we have some choices. We can get the 16 gigabyte model or the 32 gigabyte model, right? How much storage space do I need? So whenever there's a common measure that can be applied across multiple items, multiple products, multiple instances, then you organize by using a continuum. The fourth way to organize information is by location, okay? And you use location when orientation and wayfinding are important. Emergency exit maps, travel guides, the map on your phone is essentially organized by location. The essential way that we make sense of what we're trying to do is by where we are and where other things are and how long it's going to take us to get from where we are to where those things are. That's orientation, that's wayfinding. How do I get from here to there? We also use location to organize things when the information at hand is contextually related to geography. If you're touring a historic site, you typically have a map in your hand that tells you where all these important things happened. You walk up to this pile of stones and, hey, this used to be a settler's cabin in the early 1800s. It's a pile of stones right now, but no, it used to be a settler's cabin, trust me. The point is that you make sense of what you're seeing, you make sense of the things around you in context of geography, in context of location, in terms of where you are in the grand scheme of things. The fifth and final way to organize information is by time. And we do that when we're presenting and comparing events over fixed durations. A historical timeline of some sort uses a time-based organization, right? This event happened, then this event happened, then this event happened, and as those events happen, time is passing. Whether you have DirecTV or Time Warner Cable or use Hulu or some other web-based service, when you look at a channel guide, when you look at a listing of, what's coming on right now, you're looking at a time-based organization of information because it shows you what's happening over a duration of time. The other instance where we use a time-based organization is when a time-based sequence is involved. When you go to IKEA and buy furniture that comes packed flat in a box that is so impossibly small you can't imagine that your stuff is actually in there, you get out the manual and you look at it and you put the thing together step by step by step by step. That's a time-based sequence. That's information organized over time. So the next time you are tasked with organizing an information set of any kind, remember these 5 ways that you can categorize things: alphabetical, categorical, continuum, location, and time. In addition to appropriate organization, good information design is also about appropriate form. What's the best visual representation of what we're trying to get across here? At a glance, when people see this, what's the best way for them to make sense of it? And the easiest example to show you is that of traditional business charts and graphs, which are quite honestly grossly overused. But the reason they're successful in general is because they display information visually, okay? We can get complex information at a glance. So if we're talking about fourth quarter sales across multiple retail channels, in this case, department stores, discount stores, specialty stores, and other types, what's the best way to display this information where it's going to be the most obvious, the easiest to digest, and the easiest to comprehend and understand? Is it a bar chart that looks like this? Is it a line plot that looks like this? Or is it a bar chart on the side? Is this easier to understand? Or does a pie chart allow us to get a quicker handle on what our overall sales were per channel. In all those instances, we're looking at the same information, but the question is, which of those formats most efficiently, coherently, and quickly explains the data that we're looking at? Which format makes it instantly understandable, makes it instantly recognizable, makes it instantly useful? It's not just a question of being able to read it. It's a matter of being able to comprehend it, know what it means, and then be able to apply that information somehow, usually in terms of decision making. How did what I see allow me to take action? Another aspect of appropriate form is the structural form of the content in terms of the way it's presented. In terms of any kind of visual design on an interactive device, on a laptop, on a computer, on a phone, on a tablet, the traditional way of presenting content, of presenting written information, doesn't really hold water. Traditionally, if you were writing a 5-part essay, you would do it in this way. You would start with an introduction, then you would have some narration that explains the premise of what you're talking about. Then you would have an affirmation that affirms the premise that you're talking about. Then you might have negation, right, which is a counterargument or, something additional to think about. And then finally, after you did all those machinations, you would have a conclusion. That's a standard way of writing an essay, a paper. It's a situation where the person's engagement is sort of captured, okay? You're there for a period of time. You've already made a commitment to being there for a period of time because the article is 45 pages or the book is 100 pages or the essay is the size of an encyclopedia. The point is you've made a commitment to sort of sit there and read through it, okay? That's a very different mode of operation than most people who are using something on a laptop or on a tablet or on a phone. It's a very different style of interaction. The form you use instead, whenever you're designing something that's digital, is the same form that journalists use, okay? We call it the inverted pyramid style of writing. And the purpose of it is to quickly convey the most important information of the story to readers. The reason it works is because no matter how far into an article someone reads, the most important information has already gotten through. The more you read, the more detailed information you get. But no matter where you stop reading, the main message has already been conveyed. So we don't care if you read the whole thing. You've already got what we wanted you to get. So for our purposes, we start with the conclusion. We lead with the most critical information, which is usually the who, the what, the where, the when, the how. It's the information that has to be conveyed in order to make communication successful. From there, we provide helpful information. Not necessarily critical information, but it does contain additional facts and details that are revealed in the order of importance. Information here is useful to understanding the whole story, but even if you left it out, the message would still be communicated. Finally, when we get down into the weeds, into the details, we've got good information, but it's essentially unnecessary. These are details for the people who are most interested, who really want that nth level of detail. Now, that journalistic inverted pyramid also relates to an inverted pyramid of visual design, and it works like this. Your most dominant elements on the screen should be seen first and most often, okay? Those are the things that communicate your primary messages for the page. Next, through a hierarchy of focal points, items of equal importance are grouped on a layer of equal visual weight. Each layer communicates its own message or messages. Layers of greater visual weight contain more important information. Visual organization is the same thing as informational organization. The most important things stand out. The next most important things also stand out, but they don't compete with the things that are dominant. Finally, when we get past those two levels of hierarchy, we have details for those who have expressed interest in knowing more. So for instance, when you go to a blog, the first thing that you see is usually a snippet of information, very large headline, a quick description of what that particular piece is about, and then a read more button or a continue button, whatever the case may be. The point is, you've been introduced to both the dominant elements and the core focal points. If you want to go beyond that, you can, but you're not forced to deal with them. So that's how the inverted pyramid relates to visual design as well. That's how it relates to form. Next, I'd like to introduce you to the principle of Occam's razor. This comes from science, and it's a theory that says The simplest answer to any problem or the simplest explanation to any phenomenon is usually the correct one. In terms of user experience and design, it means that the simplest solution is usually the best. It means that simple is always better than the opposite, right? Which is complicated, complex, difficult. Here's an example. This particular company started with a homepage on their website that looked like this. And then they did some user testing to see what people thought of it. Well, the thing that they heard constantly was you have too many things on the homepage. And they didn't agree with that at first. But they said, you know what? We're happy to test it out. We could be wrong. You never know. So they did some testing where they showed different versions of the site to different user groups, got a lot of really good feedback. And it turned out that they had been wrong. They did have way too many things on their website. So they redesigned it to look like this, which essentially means that they removed 80% of the content. They left one sign-up button and one learn more link. Conversion, which means people clicked and got to the sign-up link and actually completed the form and signed up for the service, increased by 300%. 300. That's huge. So this is certainly an example of an instance where the simplest solution was absolutely the best solution. Here's another example. These are two different kinds of project management software. On the left, you see something called Basecamp, okay, which is made by a company called 37 Signals. On the right, you see Microsoft Project, which is made by Microsoft. Now, just at a glance, you can get a sense of the complexity of each one, and you probably also get an idea of how hard each one might be to use, or to learn how to use for that matter. So you probably assume that Basecamp is much simpler, much more straightforward, cleaner, less clutter, more organized, and you would be absolutely right about that, okay? Now, what it sacrifices to be that way is it sacrifices a certain degree of functionality. Okay, Microsoft Project does 101 things that Basecamp does not. However, I will tell you that in 22 years of working in corporate industry, I have yet to meet an instance where all the members of a project team efficiently, effectively used Microsoft Project. And that's simply because there's just too many things to contend with. So communication suffers as a result. Things don't get posted in time. Things don't get tracked properly. Things don't get reported when they should. There's constant touching of the interface. You got to go back and do this. Then you have to do this. Then you have to do this other thing. And then you have to do this other thing. And there's, everything has multiple steps. By contrast, I've used Basecamp, and Basecamp is dead simple because it does one thing and it does it really well. It enables communication between all members of the team in a common place. It allows you to store all your documentation in a common place, and it easily, quickly alerts everybody when something happens. That's it. No bells and whistles. The feature list is about, 10 items long, and that's all it does. And 37 Signals made a decision from the beginning to say, this is what we're doing, and we're not doing anything but this. So they pretty much ignored all the additional feature requests that they did get every once in a while. And that's because anyone who's looking for those features and functions, this wasn't the right product for them. They'd be better suited with something like Microsoft Project. So what I'm trying to get to is part of appropriate form is making sure that what you're putting out there directly answers the needs of the people using it. Meet their core needs and forget about everything else. Always remember that the simplest solution is usually the right solution. Appropriate form also comes from applying the most critical of design principles, and that is progressive disclosure. Start with the fact that information presented to a person who isn't interested in it or isn't ready to process it is noise. If I don't want it, if I don't need it, if I can't use it right now, it's noise. From a design perspective, only necessary or requested information should be displayed at any given time. All right? This helps us manage complexity. It allows us to keep our focus. It allows us to make sure that we complete whatever task that's directly in front of us right now accurately, appropriately, expediently. Here's a great example of that. This is an app for blood drives. This is a mobile app, and the example you're seeing here is on a Windows phone. When I first look at the screen, I've only got 3 major choices. And in this case, those happen to be alerts. We have an urgent need for AB+, We've got a shortage of AB plus in this other location, and there's a general blood drive. If I want any more than that, there's a little more button down there. I can access it if I want it. But take a look at how this works. Everything scrolls from side to side. While what I'm only confronted with up front is alerts, I also have bookings, I have news, I have a profile information, I have settings, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all this other stuff that exists behind that first screen. If I swipe, it all comes into my view. The point is, I only have to deal with one thing at a time. Whatever I happen to be concerned with at the moment, that's what I see. I don't see everything all at once. That allows me to keep focus, it allows me to stay on task, and it allows me to be efficient with my time and my activity. On the heels of progressive disclosure comes Hick's Law. And what Hick's Law says is that every additional choice we have to make increases the time required to make a decision. Put another way, the more choice we give people, the easier it is for them to choose nothing. Okay? When we're confronted with too much, we typically don't want to deal with it. We shut down. We say that's too difficult. If I have to go through all this stuff to understand what's going on, forget it. I'm just not doing it. Okay, that's human nature. It's not because we're lazy. It's not because we procrastinate. It's because we're wired, essentially, for efficiency. Our physiology is wired to be productive, to be efficient, to maximize its resources. Okay, in an age where we have an almost infinite set of choices, okay, on any given website, there's this sea of information out there. You know, you get on Google and do a search, you get millions and millions and millions of results. That's a massive volume of information. So when we have that much choice, we need filters. We need better filters, more filters to help us sort of dig through all that. And here's a simple example. This is a wine website which carries an enormous inventory. Okay, they carry hundreds of thousands of styles and types, you know, from a million different countries. We have red, white, green, blue, purple, you name it, they've got it. Point is, when you carry such a large inventory, if you expect people to be able to buy from you, that means they have to find what they're looking for very quickly. Okay, they're not going to casually browse 100,000 bottles of wine to find what they're looking for. No one has that kind of patience. So what they do is they enable a really good set of filters here on the left-hand side where you can pick, you know, your features, your region, what type of wine you're looking at, from what country, from what year, for what type. Is it a Cabernet, a Merlot, a Chardonnay? What is it? And the list goes on and on and on and on and on. For wine connoisseurs, there's an infinite list of characteristics and attributes that they attribute to wine. And these filters list all of those things. Okay, so the point is, you can filter your way through this enormous list of stuff very simply. It maximizes your time. It allows you to pinpoint the stuff that you do care about and ignore everything else. That's Hick's Law in effect. We can make a decision faster if we have to make less choices. Here's another quick example. When Twitter first came out, the homepage looked like this. There were all these different choices, okay? If you're new to Twitter, read this box here. You can see who's here right now. You can look at top tweets. You have all these categories that are sort of trending topics that are scrolling by, all right? Then there's navigation at the bottom. There's multiple things on this page. Well, what Twitter figured out over time is that nobody was using any of that stuff. And because either nobody cared about it or there were just simply too many choices that prevented people from making a decision. So if you look at Twitter today, it looks like this. Pretty simple. Choose your language, either log in or sign up. That's it. That's simply because they learned that those are the only two things people were using that page for. So all that other stuff is noise. Maximize signal, minimize noise. Make it easy for people to make a choice. Take a look at Pinterest. Pinterest is organized essentially by images. The images that you see, the pictures, are the core pieces of information that sort of bring you there in the first place. They're the core things that you care about. They are what enables the context of what you're looking at. Now, what happens if we remove the images? Well, it automatically becomes a lot less interesting, first and foremost. But second of all, it's a lot less useful. And that's because our context of use is now gone. Our reason for being there in the first place, which is the images, has disappeared. So the context of our experience no longer makes any sense. The form that you choose is what dictates how people will use it. It's what enables them to make a choice or not make a choice. It has a huge impact on people's decision-making ability. And because of that, the glue that you use to tie everything together absolutely has to be appropriate. It has to be appropriately organized, and it has to be presented in the appropriate form.